Hi, I'm Florian Kirmaier, CTO of Sundek and lead developer of JPro. I'm here to talk about JavaFX in the web with JPro. Who of you has heard of JPro? Oh, some hands. Who of you have heard about JavaFX? Great, everyone is awake, so I can skip the control question with Java. Okay, so then I have to show you a lot of cool things today. So first, a quick overview about the agenda. First, I will tell you a little bit about the why, and then I give you a quick example, and then I will go a little bit more in details on how it works, so you understand the architecture and its benefits and drawbacks. Then I will talk about our open source ecosystem, where you have a lot of tools which are useful for JavaFX web development, but also are very useful for JavaFX desktop development, which probably is for nearly everyone here in the room very interesting. Then I will show you example project, the rewritten JPro1 website, and then I have some optional bonus content. Yes. So intro to JPro. Why have you built JPro? When you are a JavaFX developer, you always get this question like, can you deploy your JavaFX application on the web? Has it a future if you can host it on the web page? All these questions are coming very often to JavaFX developers, but you never had a good answer to it, and we provide a solution to run your application as a web application. With this technology, you can run everything with one code base and cross-compile it to both a desktop and a web application, but you can also cross-compile it with Gluon to a mobile application or also an embedded application. We also have a concrete example project where we have done this ourselves, where we run it in all these environments. So which advantages do you have? With Java and JavaFX, you have a very stable ecosystem, which is very critical for businesses because most tools have usually a very short hype cycle where it's often replaced by newer technologies. But the Java ecosystem itself is very stable, and the APIs are very stable as it is with JavaFX, and this gives what is done with JavaFX a lot of more value, and putting it also on the web just increases this argument, and especially web applications often have to be rewritten quite frequently. With JPro, you can migrate your JavaFX app without rewriting it entirely, which is often a huge hazard and a huge risk for businesses when they have to go to the web market. Now I will show you a quick example. This is, it hasn't started yet. This is a medical application. It was an old prototype, but now it's there's a newer version, but I'm not allowed to show it because this version is already released as a desktop application. And this application was approved by the FDA, and it does a lot of complex operations like image processing, having complicated workflows, analyzing images with a huge backend and front-end technologies. And this is basically could have been ported without really much effort for the development. So how does this all work? How does the magic work? When you're using JPro, there's a server running on the backend, which is its own JVM. And this JVM basically contains the JavaFX application. And the JavaFX application has its scene graph. And on the desktop, the scene graph is rendered. But when we're using JPro, this part is disabled. But the scene graph gets created just as it is usually done. And this scene graph then gets serialized in an internal format, which is then sent to the browser and gets recreated. But it's not a snapshot of the scene graph which gets serialized, but more like a stream where you get all the live updates of the application and it's sent to the browser. And on the browser, then the scene graph gets rendered, and it's also, when possible, gets rendered with the standard HTML elements. So when you have like a text element, you have a normal HTML text element. So when Google looks at the web page, it can also index it, and when you have an image, it's an image. And what JPro also does is it's not basically rendering an image of the application, but it's recreating the scene graph. So it's basically more like vector graphic, where when you zoom in, you can look at all the details of the application. Like, it's usually interesting when you zoom into a button, you see how the border exactly looks. And on the browser side, for the user, he just sees the application and he doesn't know that this synchronization is happening. And when the user makes events like mouse clicks or key presses, these get sent back to the JVM on the server, and then comes the process handling, which, due to the events, updates the scene graph, and then the user has a real running application. So why would you build web apps with JavaFX and JPro? What are the advantages of the architecture? First, because you are running a JVM on the server, you can just use all the tools of the Java ecosystem you normally know and love. So you can use any programming language, which isn't obvious for such tools, because like GWT in the past, it was just cross-compiling Java files, and when you had the JavaServer library, you couldn't use it because GWT needed the Java files, and you also couldn't use it when you use files used from a different language which compiles to bytecode. When using JPro, you get a pixel-perfect image, which is also very compressed, because it just gets rendered as vector graphic, and vector graphic usually just has information like, here's a rectangle, here's a circle, here's a border of the rectangle, but not many bytes have to be sent to the browser to represent the scene graph. And this format is also very optimized, so it's really a low bandwidth, which the user often doesn't notice. We often have the effect that the biggest thing is the JavaScript file, and the real interaction is basically very fast. With this application, when the logic is running on the server, the user can't reverse engineer the application, which is a big advantage in some cases, because in some cases, how your application works can be critical for to keep hidden. Like when you write a banking app, you don't want that every detail gets public. So if you would write a banking app, you would have to hide all the logic in backend servers. But in this case, the user can't see actually what's happening. And also the API endpoints of your application also get hidden, because the user only communicates to the JPro server, and therefore he can't interact with the backend services you have and can try to find security problems in them. With JPro, you can also not just run a full screen application, but you can also embed it as a smaller part of a bigger application, like you are used to with YouTube. In YouTube, you can just take a video and paste it, for example, in your blog article. And with JPro, you can also just make your application to a small part and integrate it into a bigger website. And of course, you get a multi-platform experience where you can use the same code for different environments. So you can cross-compile it to desktop and to desktop and mobile, and also have your mobile. Your web page, and the web page also works in mobile, so you get a really true cross-platform experience. Here we have a small example. This is an application called Siemens Polarium. It's a product lifecycle management software. I can't tell you too much about the detail, but on the surrounding you have here, This is basically a web application. So the Polarion itself is not written in JPro, but inside of it there's a plugin where a company in Munich has basically implemented Excel in JavaFX, and they use it to integrate it in this Polarion application, so the user can directly inside of this ecosystem edit the Excel file in a way so the workflow of the user doesn't get broken and he can just work very efficiently. Also, there are the flyers around here. Unfortunately, the flyers are in Germany, so I kind of forgot to create new versions of them, but it's a little bit of puzzle then to translate them. But I think Google is very good nowadays in dynamic translation. Yes, and yes, and integrating Excel can be very important. So it's also a little bit advertisement for them to show you that this is possible. So how can you use JPro? Usually when you use JPro, you use the Gradle and the Maven plugin, which can easily be added to your application. So we have a Gradle plugin and a Maven plugin, and when you add it to your application, you can just use the JPro run command or the Maven JPro colon run task. And we also have minimal sample projects, which shows you how to run a very simple application. We have one for Gradle, which is just a Hello JPro project, usually linked on our website, and also the Hello JPro Maven project. Usually when I also start a new JavaFX project independent of JPro, then I usually use that as a base because it's just an easy way to get started. And you can also just use the Gradle W run command to run the desktop version of the application, which is very useful. Okay, let's go to our platform libraries, to the open source libraries we have created. So we call this collection of libraries the JPro platform, which are various open source libraries. And today I will present you especially three parts. It's a routing library, which solves basically how to write a normal web application, but it's really, really useful also for desktop application, which I hope I can convince people, because since I'm using it for desktop applications, the projects became so much more cleaner. Then you have the authentication library, which allows you to add basic authentication to your app, like OAuth, and it also has a desktop application, a desktop implementation to use OAuth, which is very useful because normally this is very tricky to implement. And we have a small file handling library, which is also very useful. And one of my favorites is also the Markdown library, which allows you to add Markdown elements inside of your application. So it's basically like a label, but you put in Markdown content and you get Markdown back, which really gives you an easy way for this rich text experience, which probably should soon be rewritten with the new library APIs available, or at least when they are officially stable. So the JPro routing. With the JPro routing, you use the route pattern for your application. With it, you get very clear and elegant code compared to your normal desktop application. And it also solves the problem of page navigation, because most of the JavaFX desktop application had to write their own logic to basically implement page navigation. And every desktop application has written it again and again, and usually in a way in which they're incompatible with each other. So, what is a routing pattern? With the routing pattern, you define a route, which is just a function from a request to a response. And a request in this case is usually an URL, maybe an URL with some additional information like cookies or HTTP headers. And based on that request, the function must return a response, which is usually the page you want to show, which can be represented from the node, but it also can be a redirect, or it can just be an empty response when the route doesn't define any content for that URL. And we also have filters. Filters are functions from route to route which can fundamentally change how they're behaving and can add very useful tools, which I will later show some examples for it. So which advantages do you have when you use the routing pattern? The routing pattern is kind of necessary to get this web experience where when the user goes to a subpage of your app and then copies the link and sends it to someone, then he expects to open the same page and not to start at the start page of the page again. And sometimes we also want this for desktop applications, like many applications like Steam or app stores have that every entry has a stable link, so you can also send to other person links to a place in the desktop app. With the routing pattern, you get composable elements. On the desktop world, when you have two small desktop applications and you want to bring them together, then it's usually a nightmare because the page navigation works totally different. You kind of have to put a lot of work to integrate them into each other, which is really a lot of work. But with the route pattern, there's a really easy way to do it because you can just add the route of the app 1 as part of a bigger route, and you add the route of app 2 as a bigger route, and you can just refer to them with links. With the route pattern, you get also another advantage, you get reusable extensions. Usually the filters I've talked before allows you to add things like statistics or analytics to your application without really integrating it in the complexity of your own code base, because you can now implement them independent of what your app is doing. So you get statistics in a way that it's truly reusable, and you can also much more easily integrate development tools. Here we have a very quick and simple example. This is basically the hello world for the routing app. You define your class hello route, and you extend the class route app, and the route app itself extends the JavaFX application. And now, instead of defining a main method, you just define the route of your application, which usually is a list of mappings between URLs and pages. So in this case, when the user opens the initial page, he gets redirected to /hello, and when he's on /hello, then a simple label is returned as the app. Now let me talk about the filters, which scenarios are possible with them. With the filters, we have the def filter, which allows you to add tools like live CSS updates implemented with CSSFX, or you can get an easy interface to open Scenic View. With a statistics filter, you can get things like how often was your page opened, or other information like how long did it take to render your page, or how many nodes does your current page has. Or also very useful, whether your page has a memory leak, because when you go from one page to another page, it also gives you update whether the old page could have been collected, which is usually another huge topic during JavaFX development, but this makes it much easier to find these issues. I've also spent a lot of time fixing all sorts of memory leaks in the JavaFX ecosystem, because we were monitoring them so closely, so we found all of the niche corner cases. And also then we have the authentication filter, which basically allows you to add authentication very easily to your app. For the record, the authentication can also be used independent of the routing, but now with in combination with the routing, you can do something like add authentication to your app, totally independent of the logic of the app. Like when you have a huge desktop application, you want to put it on the web, but it doesn't have any form of login, you can just add a login before the application with an authentication filter. Let me give you a quick example. Does it work? Yes. Yes, this is JavaFX Central website. Who of you knows this website? Okay. This is a very nice project where you get a lot of useful information about the JavaFX ecosystem. You get like all the libraries and videos in the past and people in the community. Yes, and you can also add yourself because it also has a link to two GitHub projects. The JavaFX Central is the website itself, and the JavaFX Central data is an open source repository where all the information is contained, what is shown on the page. So you can add yourself, usually in JSON, or your project, and then it goes to a pull request, and when the change is reasonable, then it can be added. And yes, and here we have the filters at the top I was talking before. Like at the top you see some information like how many bytes have been sent during the session here. So in this case it's 400 kilobytes, and the latency and how long it took to render this page, and also split here for how long did it take for the browser to render the initial state of the page. And also some information like how many nodes you have. So this is very useful during development, and you don't have to change anything on your code, on your application code, which is very useful because it's so annoying when your application code gets mixed with this development tools you have to develop yourself, because you can't use anything which exists before. And below we have the def filter, which has like a statistics how many pages has been not collected. Here it's luckily 0. Also which element is focused, and there's one which is a fan's favorite. This is the scenic view button, and when I click on it, I should have updated the version, then the scenic view is opened in the browser. It's a little bit hard to navigate here because I don't see it here on my side, but it just works perfectly. And of course, the def filter also works on the desktop. So when you're working on your desktop application, you just can integrate it very easily, the scenic view, if you have to debug something. Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay, I already talked about the repositories. Now let me talk about the authentication module. So the JPro Auth library, it works both for web and desktop. I think for developers most interesting is the OAuth implementation. Like adding Google OAuth is very complicated, and it allows you a way to integrate it into your application. For the JPro Auth libraries, there are usually 4 main contents. You have the authentication, which is the process to identify a person. Then we have the credentials, which is some form of data which are used to authenticate a specific user. The authorization process checks which person is allowed to do what. And the authentication provider is usually some service to authenticate. Currently, we implement 3 authentication providers. The most important one is the OAuth 2 provider. Then we also have one using the JWT Auth flow, and the other one, which is probably very important, is the basic Auth, which is just a username password authentication, and you basically can add your own logic how this is handled. So usually you have your own backend or logic how this is working. And on the code, this is then looking very elegantly because you just have to define your auth provider, which is usually using the Google Client ID and the Google Client secret. You have to register in Google to get these values. Unfortunately, it's not allowed to share them because they are considered security relevant, also for demo applications, which in my opinion is very annoying, because I would really love if Google would just have a simple one. User gets a warning, this is just a demo app, and then you can just test it, but unfortunately that's not how it works. And then on the routing, you have to create some form of login page. And you have to add the OAuth filter to tell it what to do when the user has logged in, because in the login page he usually clicks the button which redirects him to Google, then he comes back and the filter handles that, and then you can redirect him to whatever subpage you want. And the user session is then a variable where you can check whether the user is defined or not. File handling. The JPro file library allows you to implement file opening, file saving, and file dropper. But all of these APIs are cross-platform and they are future-based, so never is UI of the user blocked. And the code is very simple. Usually you have like 5 lines. On the web there are some specialities which makes it not non-obvious how to implement this, because the web has often some restrictions, like you're only allowed to open a file opener during a click event. And that's also one reason it's important to abstract that logic away so you get the security permission. And these 3 APIs are all very similar, especially the opener and dropper are very similar. And on the dropper you can just say, when on this node someone drops a file, then it handles it, but the logic is basically the same as with the file open picker. And it also abstracts away the uploading process, because usually when you use the web, the uploading takes time, and this is also part of the abstraction here. Okay, let me show you one example project. Initially I wanted to show a different project, but I had some bad luck and I couldn't work on it. But I had to work on able to work on our new website. So let me open it. Let's hope this pop-up comes never again. Oh, do I finally have internet? I wonder has happened. Yes, this page is entirely written in JavaFX. It's using the routing framework. It's a relatively new page, so don't go too much into the details, but I will show you how this works. Yeah, this gets a little bit messy. Like on the web app, we have one big route where we basically get all for the different URLs, return a different nodes. Then we also have some trick to add this title and description to the website, so Google finds good things to index and gives us a good page rank. And the pages, in this case, are usually very simple. They are just VBoxes, and the different sections on the web page are just basically nodes here. So basically the header is one entry in the VBox, the banner is one entry in the VBox, the testimonials are one part of the VBox, and this contrast card area. Yeah, and that way the page is basically implemented and has one part which is a little bit separate. Like we have the documentation when I find it. Oh, that's the wrong file. And the documentation itself is also basically another route, because it works on itself and works a little bit like an own application, because it has a lot of logic to get the different pages for the documentation. Yes. Okay, so I think I should continue with the presentation so we have more time for the Q&A, and I don't have many slides left, so I think the Q&A is probably more important than yes. So let me summarize a little bit. So What is the JPro runtime? With the JPro runtime, you can run JavaFX applications in the web. On this architecture, the JVM is running on the server, so it's not like a simulated JVM on the browser, but for the user it's transparent because he doesn't knows it. We usually support the latest JavaFX version. Actually, I plan to make a version of JavaFX 24, and I've seen the preparations, but the release was missing. So I didn't have time to do that yet, but we will catch up. Yes, and we also do a lot of open source libraries, which are very interesting for JavaFX developers, and which can really improve the productivity of people. Yes, and maybe let me go to the bonus content. Yes. We've also started to write a 3D version of JPro, so we've also made a version which renders JavaFX in 3D. It's at the moment in beta because when you know the original applications, you notice the colors are a little bit off, and to really have the true feeling, we would have to be closer on the lightning and color palettes of JavaFX, because modern 3D engines in the web usually have a very realistic lightning model, and JavaFX is on that side more straightforward and is closer to the values you give it than most 3D frameworks. But we will get there, we know how to solve it. Yes. Okay, then I guess you can ask questions. Yes, I think the microphone is on the way.
I guess my only question would be, as you're developing these JavaFX programs, to me it appears that you have to develop in a certain way. Is that true?
Slightly. It depends a little bit on the application and on some details. You can either just use plainly your JavaFX application, like the routing is optional. JPro works without the routing, like the two apps I had before. Like that one doesn't know of the routing, and the medical application also doesn't know of the routing. So usually we have two kinds of person using JPro. Either the ones which just want to make the application run, maybe put some effort to fix some small things, but generally doesn't want to change a lot. And then you can also write your application on that way that it really feels like a natural web application. When you don't go this route, then you just notice that it's basically one desktop application running on a page. You will notice that as a user, it's a different user experience.
One other question, if you don't mind, like right-click menus and things like that, does this handle that kind of stuff as well?
You can configure it to either use a web right-click or the JavaFX right-click. Like on the web, you sometimes want to have the browser right-click because then people are confused, like what is going on. So when you want to present a real web page, you usually want to hide the right-click. But when you make your run an existing JavaFX application, you really need the right-click because then the flow just doesn't work. And also, like the menu is going down when you use the system menu bar. Yes. Any further questions?
How do you handle the back button using the routing thing?
Yeah, the back button. There are different strategies, like on the when you use the routing, I haven't mentioned that, like when you switch the page, then it uses the so-called history API to not reload the application, but to just exchange the content. And when you go back to the same website again, then it does the same. So it basically just exchanges the content and doesn't restart basically the browser tab. When you, of course, have a normal desktop application and just run it and you click on back, then you're back, I guess you can intercept it with JavaScript, and it would be a thinkable feature to have that like in a configuration option to disable it by default. But yeah, I think that were all the cases possible. Yes.
Is it one JVM per user?
We support both ways. When you want compatibility with your existing applications, then you want one JVM per user, because otherwise the logic breaks too much, and even when you use class loading, it changes too much. But you can also program it with multiple users per JVM. Then you have like increased performance, but you have to be careful that they don't influence each other. So it's like writing a backend software. You shouldn't put the data of user A into a static field and read it from user B. Then you have to be careful.
And do you use FXML to lay out the pages or no?
You can use it without any problems. Maybe it's worth mentioning CSS works exactly the same as with normal JavaFX, because the CSS is happening on the server. So you get automatic compatibility and don't have to change anything on that part. And it's also doing exactly the same as the version, like the new CSS transition we've talked about before. They just work out of the box when you use the appropriate JavaFX version. Any more questions? No? I'm sure you have many more questions. Yes.
Where does the rendering actually happen for seeing it on the web?
On the JVM, a scene graph is created, but no rendering, so no GPU involved. And since this is sent basically to the JavaScript client on that part, it recreates it like with HTML. We can also give it a quick look, I think. Here's my mouse, like when you go here, and I open the developer tools. Then you can just click into these elements, and you see they get basically recreated as div element at that case, but the changes get kind of synchronized. So when you move it 1 pixel on the JVM, it moves it also here. So it's actually rendering on the JVM. That's why it's basically it's like a thin client on the client, but also a thin app on the server, because it doesn't do much anymore except positioning the parts of the scene graph.
Okay.
And the resource usage is, of course, mainly depends on what you're doing on your application. Like you can make some correlation, like how many nodes you use, but at the end, usually the tricky part is what is limiting your usage. Like when you like on the medical application, you have some operations happening with Java 2D and images, and somewhere are big images lying around because the application needs it. Maybe not just to render it, but to do operations on it. And usually that's what's causing most of the resource usage.
Hi. How do you manage the multiple JVMs for users?
Yes. We have a separate process. Maybe I have like special slides here. Let me find my cursor. Maybe I can. No, I don't have them enabled. We have a process called JPro Load Balancer. It's planned to integrate it tighter with JPro, so it's more transparent to the user. At the moment, there is a JPro Load Balancer jar, and you can start it with your JPro project, and then it automatically creates a new JVM for every user, or at least depending on the configuration. In the future, I want that to be more like a configuration flag. So like in build Gradle or hello JPro, you just say it to true or false. And it also supports that you distribute it between multiple servers if you want to. Yeah.
So what is there any lag between, like if you're pushing a lot of data down or a lot of refreshes? Do you notice lag when on the client side?
I mean, usually the bottleneck is the RAM because people just have pages open and your application just might use a lot of RAM for some reason. So that's usually the bottleneck. The CPU is usually not the bottleneck in that case because not so much is happening. Of course, when you have like bugs, like your layouting is unstable and reprocesses every frame, then you can get into these kind of problems. But usually it's the RAM.
Is the browser see any lag though if there's a lot of like a high frame rate or?
Well, if your JVM gets slower, then you would notice in the browser that you get the updates slower.
Okay, so the browser doesn't have a problem keeping up with the frame refreshes or?
No, usually not.
Okay. No.
I mean, I think I'm quite sure you can get this problem with 3D if you, depending on what you're doing, but usually it's not the problem.
Okay.
And you probably have to try artificially to get this problem.
The funny thing is we had a swing application and we rewritten it to JavaFX, and when it was in the browser, it was faster than the swing application itself.
Yeah, that happens actually quite often, that we have the fact that the web version is often faster than the desktop application for mixed reasons. Yes, that can happen. It depends often. I mean, a lot of complex things are happening, and of course, the other version also exists. So,
How do you bundle these apps? Are you using like?
yeah,
Are you bundling them using a J package?
At the moment,
Really?
we have a quite straightforward solution. You have a task in the Gradle and Maven plugin, which calls JPro release, which just creates a zip file with a start and stop script. What I want to have in the future to have additional is the option to have like easy Kubernetes or similar deployment where you just say make it as big as I want. But at the moment, you just get this zip and you run it, and optionally with the load balancer you can scale it to multiple JVMs. So you
So it
get
doesn't
bigger
necessarily
content.
have to be modularized to deploy
No,
it on a service?
no. Modularization is optional. Like we have a flag, you can enable it or disable it, and depending on what you set, when you set it to modularize, then it modularizes everything, and otherwise it tries to keep the logic of the build system as existent as possible. It's interesting because Gradle and Maven behave very differently, and when you do something else, it usually behaves also differently, which is another reason why the modularization is often very complicated. And like when you move your application from Maven to Gradle and want to use the same modularization, it just behaves differently.
Okay.
Who is the company behind the JPro? And when it was invented, created?
Yeah. The company behind JPro is Sandek. I'm basically the co-founder and vice colleague. In 2016, we had like a demo presentation of it where we won a Duke Choice Award. It's a long time ago, and a lot of things happened since then. We definitely now know much better what we are doing, and also done a lot of projects with it, and also doing very frequent updates. So usually we make every month a new update. That's our usual update cycle. Any more questions? Final chance? Final chance? No, I can also continue.
Yeah, just one last one. So is this open source, or do we have proprietary stuff here?
Yeah.
And is there maintenance agreements you can get?
Yeah, maybe there's some interesting points. First, it's proprietary. We do a lot of open source work, but the core runtime is proprietary. It's a license model where you basically have to get a license but only when you use it during production, not during development. So development doesn't have any license checks, so you can just play around with it without any problems. You can also make your test server with it without getting limited. Only when you use it in production you have to buy a license. And support agreement is usually part of or in the past we had like separate license and support, but in experience people just buy the license, so I don't think the separation really makes much sense if people don't buy it. And we are also quite deep in the JavaFX ecosystem. Maybe also worth mentioning, we have for JPro our own JavaFX builds. We do a lot of JavaFX bug fixing. We also made a JavaFX build pipeline, so we can just make new releases when we know the change set. So if someone needs help on that, I guess it's also good mentioning, good to know. And I'm here for the whole 3 days. So if you want like test out your application or something like that, try to catch me. If you want like my cards, and I can give you my card. We've put everywhere the flyers, so feel free to contact us if you want to try it out.